Nobody in the classroom expected the first day of the new term to turn into the kind of story people would still be talking about months later. It started quietly, the way most problems do. 3 American exchange students walked into the classroom at a public high school in Sydney, Australia, laughing loudly, backpacks slung over one shoulder like they owned the place. Their names were Jake, Mason, and Tyler. They had just transferred for a semester abroad program, and from the moment they stepped through the door, it was obvious they believed this place was going to be easy. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe, like my video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. Jake looked around the classroom and whispered loudly enough for half the students to hear. "Bro, this school looks tiny compared to ours back home." Mason chuckled. "Yeah, and look at these uniforms." A few Australian students glanced up from their desks but said nothing. In Australia, most schools have uniforms, and students are used to international exchange kids arriving every year. Usually, things go smoothly, but this time felt different. Tyler leaned back in his chair and kicked his feet up on the desk. "Man, this is going to be the easiest semester ever." They didn't realize something important about Australian schools. The culture was different. Way different. Students didn't tolerate arrogance very well, and teachers were known for being strict about respect and behavior. At first, the class tried to ignore the Americans, but the comments kept coming. When the teacher asked everyone to introduce themselves, Jake stood up and said, "Yeah, we're from the United States. Our schools are way bigger than this, but we thought we'd come check out Australia." A few students exchanged looks. One of the local students, a quiet guy named Liam, simply nodded politely when it was his turn to introduce himself. But Jake smirked and whispered to Mason, "This dude looks like he's never even been in a gym." Mason snorted with laughter. That was the first moment people started realizing the new guys might be trouble. Over the next few days, things got worse, much worse. The American students started making jokes about the way Australians spoke. Every time someone said mate, Tyler would mock them with an exaggerated accent. "Oi, mate! Pass the homework, mate!" he joked loudly. Some students rolled their eyes. Others simply ignored him. But bullying doesn't always start with big confrontations. Sometimes it grows slowly, quietly. Jake began targeting Liam in particular. Liam was calm, soft-spoken, and focused on his studies. To Jake, that made him an easy target. One afternoon during lunch, Jake walked past Liam's table and knocked his books onto the floor. "Oops," Jake said with a grin. Liam slowly picked them up without saying a word. Tyler laughed. "Bro didn't even say anything," Mason added. "Guess he's scared." But what they didn't realize was that several other students had seen exactly what happened. And in Australian schools, loyalty among classmates runs deep. Later that week, during a group project in science class, Jake and Mason were paired with Liam and another student named Ethan. Jake groaned. "Seriously? We got the quiet kid?" Ethan looked at him calmly and said, "Maybe try doing the work instead of talking." Jake raised his eyebrows. "Relax, dude." For the first time, the Americans noticed something strange. The other students weren't intimidated. They were just watching. Over the next few days, Jake kept pushing things further. Small comments, sarcastic jokes, laughing whenever Liam spoke. But Liam never reacted, and that seemed to frustrate Jake even more. Finally, one afternoon after class, Jake decided to take things up a notch. As students packed their bags, Jake walked over to Liam's desk and grabbed his notebook. "Let's see what the genius is writing," he said. Liam stood up slowly. "Give it back." Jake laughed and held it up out of reach. "What are you going to do about it?" The classroom went silent. For a moment, it looked like Liam might just walk away like he always did. But something different happened. Instead of reacting angrily, Liam simply looked at Jake and said calmly, "You should probably give that back." Jake leaned closer. "Or what?" Before Liam could answer, another voice came from behind them. "Or you'll be explaining it to the principal." It was Mr. Harris, the teacher who had quietly returned to the classroom to grab something he forgot. Jake's smile disappeared. Mr. Harris walked over slowly and took the notebook from Jake's hand. "I've been hearing complaints all week," he said calmly. Jake tried to laugh it off. "We were just joking." Harris looked around the classroom. Were they? Several students shook their heads. That was the moment the situation started to backfire. The next morning, Jake, Mason, and Tyler were called into the administration office. At first they thought it was no big deal. Maybe a warning, maybe a lecture. But Australian schools take bullying very seriously. When they walked into the office, the principal was already sitting there with Mr. Harris, and several written statements from students who had witnessed the behavior all week. The principal folded his hands. "We have a zero-tolerance policy for bullying," he said calmly. Jake shifted in his chair. "We were just joking around." The principal slid a folder across the desk. Inside were multiple reports from students describing the comments, the mocking, and the notebook incident. Tyler's confidence started to fade. But the real shock came next. "Because you are international exchange students," the principal said, "your behavior also gets reported to the exchange program." The room went quiet. Jake frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means disciplinary action here can affect whether you're allowed to stay in the program." For the first time since arriving in Australia, the three Americans looked genuinely worried. They had expected things to be easy. They had expected people to stay quiet. But now they were realizing something important. Their behavior had consequences, and the entire situation they thought they controlled had completely flipped on them. Over the next few weeks, things changed dramatically. The Americans were required to attend behavioral meetings, apologize publicly to the class, and work on a group community project as part of the school's disciplinary program. Jake stood in front of the classroom one morning and cleared his throat. I want to apologize for the way we acted." No one said anything. Even Liam simply nodded quietly, but something interesting happened after that. Without the bullying and the arrogance, the Americans slowly started realizing something they hadn't noticed before. The students they had mocked were actually pretty welcoming. Ethan even helped them catch up on missed assignments. And Liam, the quiet student they had targeted, he turned out to be one of the top students in the entire school, and one of the most respected. One afternoon, Jake sat down next to him in the library. "Hey, about before," Jake said awkwardly. Liam shrugged slightly. "It's fine." Jake looked around the quiet room and sighed. "Honestly, I thought coming here was going to be easy." Liam smiled faintly. "Most people think that about other countries." Jake nodded slowly. And for the first time since arriving in Australia, he actually seemed to understand something important. Respect goes a long way. And sometimes, the moment you think you're in control is the exact moment everything can backfire. Because in this case, the students they tried to bully didn't fight back with anger. They fought back with something far more powerful. Standing together. And that was something the Americans hadn't expected at all. By the end of the semester, the story had spread across the school. Not because of the bullying, but because of how quickly things had turned around. And Jake would later admit something to one of his teachers. "I guess we learned the hard way." Mr. Harris smiled slightly. Sometimes those are the lessons people remember the most. And if you ask the students who were there that year, they'll all tell you the same thing. The moment those American students tried to bully their classmates was the exact moment everything started backfiring. But what happened after that semester ended surprised everyone even more. Because when the exchange program asked whether Jake, Mason, and Tyler should be allowed to stay in the program, the decision didn't come from the teachers. It came from the students. Several classmates, including Liam, wrote letters explaining how the Americans had changed their behavior and worked hard to make things right. Those letters made a huge difference. The exchange program allowed them to stay, and by the end of the year, the 3 students who had arrived acting like bullies were actually helping new exchange students adjust to the school. Jake even joked once during lunch, "Trust me, if you come here acting tough, it won't end well." Because they all knew the story. The story of how 3 American students tried to bully their classmates in Australia and how it completely backfired. But the story didn't actually end there, because something happened a few weeks later that no one expected. Word about the bullying incident had already spread around the school. Not in a dramatic way, but enough that students from other classes started recognizing the 3 American exchange students. At first, Jake, Mason, and Tyler assumed people were still judging them. But one afternoon during sports practice, something surprising happened.